live chat, which I'm going to speak on the 3rd anniversary of the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Yesterday, somebody wrote and said to me about holding the camera in my hand and asked me not to move it so much, and because it made people dizzy. I'm sorry, I forgot the stand for the camera. Oh, there's a stand for the gimbal. I have the gimbal here, but I don't have the stand for it. I didn't bring it, and that's a bit of a problem. I don't like this angle of me looking down like this, but okay, this is the only one we've got, so this is the one we're going to have to live with. It seems very strange now to be considering a situation of a war which has now been on the go for 3 years. On the 23rd of February, I was out walking, and I rang up a friend of mine in Gdansk, and I was walking a place, southern Poland, a place called Rybnik, and in the conversation with friends, so this was immediately with the situation in Ukraine, and I said, no, I think it's just posing and posturing by Putin, and nothing is going to happen other than the occupation, probably, of the so-called breakaway republics, which of course have been controlled by Russia ever since 2014. And that I never really considered that it would go this much further than that. And I don't think really all that many people did. I mean, I know there was warnings, but the warnings that were given, surely that was just as a matter of course that embassies give these type of warnings always. The Ukrainian army obviously didn't think the same. It sort of positioned its troops in the Donbass area, expecting an attack to come from there. And it was somewhat surprised when the main assault came from the north rather than from the east, or as well as north and south, as rather than from the east. It's one of them things where it's said that you always remember where you were. So think about, how did you find out about 9/11? For example, I can recall very, very clearly. I remember being said that people always knew where they were when they found out that JFK had been shot. So being of a sort of a different generation, that I don't know. But 9/11 I remember quite distinctly. As far as the invasion 3 years ago, I don't know what I was doing. I cannot remember how I found out about this. It must have been in the early morning, and I've got a dreadful memory for faces and names. But I have a very good memory for dates and what I was doing at a certain time, and I can sort of trace things. When I make videos, I can just now, for example, I thought I need a little bit of clip from this town, and I know I was there 3 years ago in August. And then I start off 3.5 years ago in August now, and then I find the clip which I was looking for. But in this case, I just cannot remember what was actually happening. Now, this thing about this war, what we've seen, there's got certain comparison with the Korean Wars, perhaps not all that helpful, but the Korean War was one where there was a great deal of movement in the first few months, and then it was stalemate for a large period of time. Now, there are those who are saying that Russia is winning because it is making it's making advances and it's capturing ground. I would absolutely contest that. I do not believe that Russia is winning this war. At least I didn't believe it until till November. Now, I think that with an administration in the United States, which is clearly pro-Putin, and this is, I think, the strategy of the American current administration is to get some kind of a ceasefire, to allow Putin to recuperate and then to have another go in a few years' time. I think that's the policy of the American. I mean, it's an incredibly stupid policy. I mean, and it just don't work. I think the problem with this is that people just don't understand how the fascist mentality actually works. And if people knew anything about history and could compare what's happening now with what happened in the 1930s, because it's so utterly similar, there aren't differences which are all that great. There is a system which is very, very similar. Now, I put things up in the past saying I believe that the Russian current system, the current government in Russia is a Nazi state. Now, there are one or two differences I accept between Nazism in Nazi Germany and Nazism as it is today in Russia, but they're not all that great. There's the number one, the very basis of the Nazi philosophy is that there's some kind of special powers of the earth and the ground. It's a Volkish movement. Now, Volkish is often translated into English as folkish, but it's not that. It's something far, when we think of folk dances and folk songs, the sort of people sitting around the campfire singing songs that people sang in the 17th century. But this is something else. It's something whereby it is a superior race, which comes, in the case of Nazi Germany, from this agricultural areas, the Heimat and what have you. In the case of Russia, it is Mother Russia. No other country that I know of refers to its own country in that way. There are words as the motherland, meaning where you come from, but that doesn't have the same effect. There is also very widespread belief that in Russia that they are a superior race. There's even a song, and it was some along these lines. I can't remember the words, but somebody will know it. It's I'm a Russian girl and I come from the country with the most superior Slavonic culture, or something. Words to that effect. I can't recall it. It's in English in any case. And so we've got these things. We've got a history of imperialism which goes back hundreds of years. And whereas, for example, every other country is decolonized in the 19th and 20th century, or 20th centuries mainly, Russia hasn't decolonized. It's still there where it was. I suppose you could argue the United States hasn't decolonized either. But there is undoubtedly in parts of these places which are colonized, where you've got to have, for example, in Kazakhstan, you can have in places where the population was almost entirely Russian, to the state today where it's like less than 10%. And so this is part of the, I think this is all part of the problems, this idea that they are superior to others. Now, people, I suppose, of my age will remember the grandparents and the grandparents who thought of in a colonial way. But I'm sure there are people in the United Kingdom today who think that they are superior for some reason over others. But it's not that. Fortunately, the government and no government has had this in their mind for many years. So I think that this thing here is the first thing. Having said, we've also had these philosophers, so-called philosophers. Now, there are those who argue that people like Dugan are not in government, but they clearly do influence Putin to a great extent. And these philosophers who argued for the complete annihilation of Ukrainian people. Now, these are people saying things about advocating mass murder. Even Hitler didn't go that far. And so this is, I'm not suggesting that that this is everybody in Russia who thinks like this, but it's also it is very, very common. Now, after the invasion, I rang up a former partner of mine who's Russian, and hoping that she wasn't getting any stick from her neighbours or something in Middlesbrough, and she said words to the effect of, well, these Ukrainians were always very nationalist, as though somehow it's the Ukrainians which are nationalist, but it's not asking the reason why they are nationalist. Let's not forget that, first of all, it's according to Putin's own philosophy, the Russian culture, the center of Russian culture is Kiev, and therefore that gives Russia the right to occupy it. Well, I mean, thinking of this logic, I mean, surely if the center of Russian culture is Kiev, then surely Ukraine should be occupying Russia, not vice versa. Thinking logically. Of course, nationalists never do think logically. We have the way that Ukrainians were treated. It is the people who were initially colonized were as happened everywhere. I mean, it happened with British in Africa, or French in Africa, or whatever, Spanish in South America. The colonists then used the people who are there, the natives. So you've got the colonists are the rich people, and the colonialized are the poor people. So they would have a situation where these lords and what have you would rule over them. And but then, in the 1930s, you have the famines, which is a deliberate act, and I would suggest of genocide. And indeed, this genocide was so successful that today, where people like, for example, the North Caucasus, which was a Ukrainian-speaking area, there aren't Ukrainian-speaking people there anymore, as far as I'm aware. If I'm wrong, please correct me. Another thing about is, for example, take the case of the Crimea, and you often see this, that people say, oh, well, Crimea was part of the Russian Soviet Federation, FSFR, Russian Soviet Socialist Federation, until 1954. Yes, that's true. But how long had it been beforehand? It became part of the Russian Soviet in 1921. So it was only 33 years. In fact, it's been Ukrainian far longer than it was Russian. And before that, it was part of the province Taurida, which was effectively is Ukraine, what it is today. So they've got these 19th century imperialist ideologies, which just in today's world don't make any sense. Now, personally, for me, if it was my decision, if people want to belong to a different country, I don't have a problem with that. And so people sort of voted to be somewhere else. Yeah, fair enough. Let them go. But if they don't want to go, Ukraine was is a democracy. There were parties arguing for unification with Russia, and they never actually got very far. But these political parties did exist. And you can find the previous election results are available, easily to be found on the internet. So this is this problem. Now, the next thing is, I mean, this nonsensical thing. So we've got this neo-Nazi state in Russia using similar arguments as to what Hitler did. And the one difference is that, the Nazi state was more racist than the Russian state is today. Admittedly, they are doing things like they recruit from the ethnic minorities. So it's the ethnic minorities that get killed, not the ethnic Russians who are getting killed. But at the same time, the ethnic minorities aren't treated the way the Nazis treated their ethnic minorities after they occupied the countries. I mean, for example, ethnic languages are not prohibited in Russia today, as, for example, speaking Polish could have been in the late 1930s in Nazi Germany. So it's not quite as bad, but if we compare it to Mussolini or to Franco, this is certainly a far worse case. I would say that there are similarities, strong similarities with Mussolini, in my opinion. Now, so if Putin's got these ideas, which are, if you go to the Kremlin website, you can see he is arguing for that Russia needs to recuperate all its terrain, but he won't say where it ends. And like all imperialists, he takes the bits which suit him. So if it's a case of, for example, occupying Finland, he'll want the border that existed before 1914. But if it's a case of occupying, for example, East Germany, but he'd want the border that existed in the 1949. It depends. It's sort of just whatever suits his argument. The problem with this type of thing, saying, this was once our territory, it's, in my opinion, it's totally irrelevant. It's what people want today. If, for example, to use a British example, Ireland was part of the England and then the United Kingdom for 800 years, far longer than any part of Ukraine was occupied by Russia. The Irish speak English. I know lots of people from Ireland. I don't know anybody who speaks Gaelic. So would this give the United Kingdom the right to occupy Ireland? I mean, even the most ridiculous nationalist in the UK wouldn't say anything that stupid. And but Putin, though, in Russia, they can get away with it. And what surprises me is that there are many people in Russia who seem to think that this is normal. So this is, I think, part of the problem. I can say I do know people with these nationalist ideas and this almost hate for others. Next thing is this attempt to try and blame the war on either Ukraine or the Western countries. Totally ridiculous. This was an invasion by the sorry, I just saw a message then which I didn't know, but I'm going to read them out. I'll read the messages out on the I'll read them out later, but what I just saw just shocked me. What I think is the worst thing of this is this, or maybe it's the worst, I don't know. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. It made the world safer. But now, having seen the result of giving up nuclear weapons, I actually, for a period, believed in the 90s that the UK should disarm its weapons. I thought that this was a thing of the past. Don't need them anymore. Get rid of them. They cost a fortune, and there's always the risk of something happening. But now after this, no country will ever give up its nuclear weapons. The biggest single threat in the world, in my opinion, is probably India and Pakistan. What happens if somebody who believes that if they let off all the nuclear weapons and then they're going to go to heaven and they're going to have 72 innocent young girls given to them and all the rest of it, and it'll be absolutely fantastic if they cause the world to go up in flames? What if that happens? That risk is there. But now it's really making that risk all the more greater, because neither Pakistan nor India nor any other country in the world will ever give up its nuclear weapons again. And then, in exchange for giving up its nuclear weapons, the United Kingdom and the United States and Russia guaranteed the borders of Ukraine. And what's happened? Well, I mean, certainly the UK and the US has given support, but the last administration, in my opinion, was just too weak with its support, and it had to be pushed to do absolutely everything. And even in the autumn of 2022, it stopped, when Ukraine was advancing, it stopped supplying weaponry in order to give Russia a chance to get its wits together again. I mean, but the current administration, which I mean, it's absolutely shocking, the behavior. Now, after 3 years, I would say this is that fortunately, there's a new government in Germany which is showing more responsibility. What bothers me more than anything else is that this war can be ended quickly and most humanely by giving Ukraine the weapons it needs to make sure that this stops. The only way of beating Russia is militarily. It needed to be militarily defeated every time, or alternatively, it's to get rid of the government in Russia, this is the problem. Now, if the Russian people are unlikely to overthrow him, but that I see is the only way. If Russia were militarily defeated, would it lead to the government being overthrown? I don't know. To come on to the main thing, though, I'd want to say was this, of the situation. Last year I didn't go to Ukraine at all, but since my last visit, Russia has made, now it's in the last few months, Russia has made some gains in territory, but it's still something. I made a calculation the other day. It's going to be something like 2480 or something by the time, and the current rate of advance by the time it occupies the entire country. So it's taken what, nearly 400 years to do this 3-day special military operation. So the advances are utterly tiny. Now, 2 years ago, now there was the battle for Bakhmut. So it's about now that Bakhmut actually was captured. And the advance since then is only about 50 kilometers. It is tiny. I made a prediction to myself that the town Pokrovsk would fall at the end of September. So I made this, I don't know, beginning of spring or something like that last year. I sort of thought to myself, and it still hasn't actually happened as such. Ukraine is hanging on. And another thing I would like to say is this about the Kursk offensive. I thought that was a masterstroke, absolutely brilliant. And the fact that the Western countries didn't allow Ukraine to use weapons on other Russian territory is something which was absurd. So you had a situation where the terrorists were flying in drones, but Ukraine was not allowed to hit them until they actually crossed the border. It doesn't bear. I think it's so stupid that it's a horrendous tying of hands. But to me, I know the argument against Kursk is that since this happened, then the Russians have made more gains in the Donbass, but the cost is enormous. I would put it like this: that the Kursk operation, okay, now I thought the beginning was just to get territory and then create what's killing areas, and then to make Russia really pay for recapturing, knowing that they would do everything to try and recapture it. Same as ways Franco did during the Spanish Civil War. He wouldn't allow the Republicans to actually capture anything that he'd once held. For example, Battle of Teruel in 1938 is a very good example of this. So that's what I consider. I know that something like nearly 2/3 now of that area that had been captured in Kursk has now been lost. But I would put it to you that Ukraine isn't losing the war. The cost for Russia to these territory that it's actually captured is so great that when it comes to a time when Ukraine counterattacks, then these territories will be they'll be lost quite quickly. We know that there is a great deal of deportation of the population in areas which are captured. I mean, I was in liberated areas, those areas that were liberated in the autumn of 2022, and going through these towns, it is places where 16,000 people lived, and you've got maybe 50 people are still left. No services there. I mean, if you imagine the situation, you've got old person living on the top of a block of flats. There's no electricity, so that means that the toilets aren't working. There's no water coming through. There's no lifts aren't working. Maybe the glass has been shot out. Very poor people before the war, and how are they now with these incredibly, people like Putin, probably the richest person in the world. It doesn't bother him. He's living in but with these poverty-stricken people, and when these things are just happening, utterly horrendous situation. I don't see things very good now because, unfortunately, if the United States pulls out of NATO, and now it needs to be borne this thing, NATO has only come into, it's only how should I, it's only, well, I can't think of the word now. It's only been used, the countries of NATO have only come together once, and that was in defense of the United States. So bear in mind that, I mean, nonsense that Trump says about NATO spending. As far as Ukraine's concerned, NATO itself is United States and Germany spend exactly the same amount of money on NATO itself. On non-NATO weaponry, yes, the United States does spend far more than other countries. Though I think Greece actually spends more as a percentage of GDP than the United States, and Poland's now coming close to it. But in any case, I think Trump's own background needs to be considered. Unfortunately, he won the election, and he won fair and square, and he got the most amount of votes. It wasn't like the other time when he won, but thanks to the electoral system and fiddling by companies like Cambridge Analytica, he won. So it is from that point of view what it is. Anyway, good. So there, I've said a few things there about it. I haven't done a Ukraine talk for 1 year, and so let's go through now onto the questions here, so I can see it all quite clearly. Anyway, right. So Colin asks, what's the position of Belarus in all of this? Lukashenko has gone very quiet and seems to have been so for a while. I think that Lukashenko could start being a bit more noisy now. Lukashenko is in a very difficult private situation because Belarus has the death penalty, and if he gets overthrown, then I don't really rate his chances. Of course, he could try fleeing to Russia, so they might take care of him. But the opposition, of course, in Belarus is quite strong. I think it needs to be pointed out, though. I think it's in these countries within the Russian orbit which have shown resistance to the regime. It's then which Putin has sought to actually crack down. And this could have been one of the reasons why he attacked Anastasio after the protests in Kazakhstan. He could have been one of the reasons why he chose to actually do this. I think Ben says he was Lukashenko was pretty loud and proud in support of Russia at the beginning, so he's gone very quiet. Yeah. And okay, so no other country refers to himself as the fatherland, only Germany. Well, yes, but it's not even quite the same, because the way it was used in Germany wasn't in the nationalist way that it's used in Russia, with these Volkish connotations that the earth breeds superior people. I'm sorry, Nazis had that ideology, but I think the fatherland could have been used in a way that I even may have said in videos that so and so decided to return to his or her motherland, which makes it in a sort of a neutral sense. Anyway, right. So Mike says English always thinking they are the best slave master royal family joke. Well, if anybody can interpret that and put it into English, that would be good. Sorry, it was on the German helmets, was it? Yeah. Mike says English think they are superior, sucks royal family joke. Okay, good. Now, Bob says Trump calls Zelensky a dictator, but if you search on Google for us, has Trump ever called Putin a dictator, you will draw a blank. Yes, okay, well, right. I think actually there was one of the things I think is really common, because you see the international Nazis all over the place, that they supporting Russia, and I think it's not just because of the fact that their love for this neo-Nazi state in Russia, but also because the fact that Zelensky is Jewish. And I'm just wondering how much Trump's own racism is actually affected this. Of course, it needs to be pointed out very clearly that his daughter, his grandchildren are Jewish, but I don't know, maybe sort of draws a distinction between the two. I'm just guessing there. Right. So it's Colin says Stalin's Europe. Look at Silesia and Western East Prussia as an example. Okay, I saw that. This is what I saw. Today's news from the United Nations. The United States joined Russia to vote against the UN General Assembly condemning Russia's war against Ukraine Monday in a stunning shift from years of US policy. Okay, I'm just reading this. I don't know what happened because I I haven't. Before this came on, I was doing a video on Erich von den Bach-Zelewski. So yeah, there you go. So Gary says, my mate's been there since it started taking supplies. They came back before Christmas. He's back again. Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, I know how he feels in that one, Gary, because I did it myself. Colin says, Nye Bevan says that without nuclear weapons, the UK would go naked to the negotiating table. And that's precisely, yes, and that's precisely what situation is now. I've got to say that I really just don't understand the idea of imperialism, because to my way of thinking is that I'd rather have things like a national health service and free public transport and or subsidized public transport and roads and schools and things of this nature, rather than a big empire in a big army and all the rest of it. The problem is that you won't have these things if you don't defend yourself. And now, if people can say, well, it's either giving money to hospitals or it's giving money to the military. Well, I could say this: when Nazi Germany occupied countries in the Second World War, you know, the Polish health service didn't get on very well during the Nazi occupation. And if we look at what Russia's done, I can say also from my own personal experience, my former partner whose mother needed assistance in the Russian health system, just couldn't get it at all. Had to do everything by the use of bribes, which is the communist way of doing things. Anyway, that apart. So Gary's written that his friend has pulled people out of rubble. Yeah, and yeah, that's not a pleasant thing to have to do. And yeah, and Gary said people wouldn't leave until the artillery got close. Yes. Now, the organisation I was working for as well also had that thing, a situation that older people just wouldn't leave. There was one situation where wouldn't leave without, had a pet bird, and wouldn't leave without the bird. And so they had to get the bird, go back and get the bird to, there was some canary or budgerigar or something. And yeah, but this is to be understood. If you've got older people in the liberated areas where I was, there wasn't young people at all. They were all old people, and they were poor old people. I mean, if you've got somebody, let's say the widow who's 75 years old, she's lived in that house all her life, and that's all her possessions, she's not going to leave it. And this is the problem. And she won't believe it until they're actually, you know, it's not even in the artillery gets close. It's when they're in, you know, they're using hand weapons, and even then, sometimes they won't go out. Anyway, Dustcat, sorry, writes, what's my opinion, the average Russian soldier fighting Ukraine? Do you think they have a choice to fight and support the invasion? Yeah, the thing is this, the Russian soldiers have no choice whatsoever. And, you know, it's very easy for people to sort of meet or anybody else just sort of sitting in a comfortable house or whatever and suggest that all they have to do is surrender. It's very difficult to actually surrender in any circumstances. And there are things that Ukraine actually offered. For example, there was this thing that they would have a drone which would take people to where they could be collected and where they could surrender. Now, in the early beginning of the war, it was much more easy because there was the breakup of individual units, and so people weren't so much under controlled. But now I think it's far more difficult. Not only that, these are not trained soldiers. So they are taking people out from the Far East, putting them into Ukraine, and often they don't even have normal boots or things like this. It's incredibly difficult for Russians. Not only that, and then they've been brainwashed and saying that they can't surrender because they'll kill them and torture them and do all sorts of things to them. And so, I mean, my heart does go out to the Russian soldiers in this situation. Of course, it is up to people to overthrow the regime. I mean, I know it's very easy, again, for me to say that, but it's the regime which is doing this to them. All they've got to do is to say, no, I won't do it. It takes one person to actually say that. Anyway, so Duskat says, "Oh, I love your content. Thank you very much." And yeah, I noticed today in Metro or whatever it's called, that free paper, that Zelensky offered to resign. I think that's good. And mind you, I've thought this for years. Is that, and I thought this about other people as well. Is that when history tells you one thing, is that once you've reached your peak at being a national hero, you don't, that's it, you've got to resign and not have anything to do with it any longer. The Duke of Wellington was a national hero in the United Kingdom after beating Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. Then he decided to go into politics, and he was hated. Mind you, he made it up for again later life, but there's lots of examples like this where people don't know when to resign. And so in the case of Zelensky, what I would suggest that he did, as soon as the war was over, or if somebody else wants to take, is capable. I don't blame him for, he's often said he's tired, he can't, it's really different. It must be, because he's under threats that Putin doesn't have. Putin doesn't make himself public. He doesn't have to. He's hidden somewhere. He probably never sleeps in the same place twice. I bet Putin is absolutely terrified. He strikes me as being the sort of person who's a coward. But in the case of Zelensky, he is he has to make himself, he must be a relatively I wouldn't say easy target, but he's far more of a target than Putin is. So in his case, I mean, if he says he'd resign, I think that's absolutely great. Colin here mentions convict battalions. Now, the convict battalion, I think they've worked their way through them. I think this was something from 2022, and I mean, I don't know, but there can't be that many convicts left that can go at the front. But there are things, and even this started appearing in the Russian press in 2023. You could find local papers where people have come back from Ukraine and they'd committed crimes again. I mean, I can recall one case where a lady had been murdered by somebody who was let out. He'd committed murder, he'd gone to prison, he'd been let out to go to Ukraine, he'd done his, whatever it was, 6-month stint there, and then he came back and he murdered somebody else. So that I read that. Unfortunately, I can't give you a link to it because I can't remember the full details. But this, I'm sure, is a major problem. So yeah, Colin mentions that Churchill should have retired gracefully after the war. Yeah, because I think, well, I mean, Churchill had a second period in office, but yeah, but I think he should have. And he was a national hero. I remember an interview with Shirley Williams. I think no, sorry, not Shirley Williams. Barbara Castle, who was a Labour minister, and she said that at the time she'd be campaigning, and the people say they wanted a Labour government, but they wanted Winston Churchill to head it, and then she said, "Well, you can't have both." And yeah, I think Churchill shouldn't have gone for the second period, particularly as he was quite inactive during it. I mean, he was too old and all the rest of it. I must say, now I'm considerably younger than what he was, but I would find that a bit difficult to actually be doing these hours, which are necessitated by that type of work. As far as Putin's concerned, Colin's right. He was a KGB officer. Now, my understanding is he was never a particularly his job in places like Dresden. He had this idea, for example, of trying to recruit people from who had families in the West, and he would let them go to the West. And if the families lived near American bases, so he picked out 3 bases, and he wanted people to actually spy them. Now, that really wasn't the job of the KGB to be doing things like that. It was more the job of the Stasi, but he was sort of largely making work. His job was something like, he had to do reports and things. So what these things would be like, and be reading the press, which is already communist controlled, and then they'd be sending out little clips and things like this, and sticking them in the scrapbook and sending them off to Moscow. This was the result of their espionage and intelligence gathering as such. It must have been pretty frightening, of course, for him when East Germany was liberated or liberated itself. He must have thought then that they were absolutely coming for him. And the thing is, he also must have realized that he was part of the oppression apparatus. And in 1989, Gary writes, J.D. Vance was right. We have to defend Europe, but we got to know what we're fighting for. Certainly not for a country where they call the police on an old lady for complaining about politicians. I don't know who calls the police on a old lady for complaining about politicians. I don't know where that happens, Gary. I mean, it probably does happen in Russia, but in the current. Have I read about the fruit pickers at Lakenheath? No, I haven't, Colin. I've no idea what that is. Lakenheath is that's in Suffolk. There was an American base now. There is American base there. Anyway, good. Right. So there's the live chat for today, I suppose. And I didn't make any notes today. I might do it again tomorrow. Actually, in theory, I've got a film coming up tomorrow, a video coming up, the Einsatzgruppen in Eastern Belarus in 1941. But I might actually do another one on Jack the Ripper tomorrow. But anyway, no, Gary says free speech is dead over here. No, it isn't, Gary. I'm speaking quite openly here. And if I want to, if I want to say Keir Starmer, I don't like Keir Starmer, I can say it quite openly. You can't do that in Russia, and somebody can't get on the internet in Russia and say I don't like Putin. If they did, they would be very quickly arrested. And you can see the incredible heroism of some people, particularly young ladies who've actually done it, because the men who actually complain, they're the ones that end up being forced, therefore, to go into the army. But the women are doing it. That's it. So 3 Russians were flying drones over Lakenheath posing as fruit pickers. How did they get into the UK, or were they already here? I went to this area, which is sometimes called Londongrad. So it's around they've got, those who don't know London, you've got Buckingham Palace, and out the back of Buckingham Palace, you've got this area called Belgravia, which is sort of a bit to the west of there, between Buckingham Palace and where Knightsbridge is. And you've got Eaton Square. I've been there twice now in the last couple of months. And I'm not exaggerating when I say you hear more Russian spoken there than you do English. And at least I did anyway. Maybe it was just a off chance. Anyway, good. So these people are 6-month seasonal workers, visas. Yeah, but where did they come from? Which country? That's the question. Ben says Durlevanger 2.0. Okay. Okay, right, very good. Sorry, I'll end here. And that was Lakenheath. I knew nothing about. There was a case. I remember I was in the UK at the time when somebody had it was like half a day. There was no flights out of Heathrow, I think it was, because of a drone. Though I can't remember the circumstances, so I don't really know what happened more than that. Okay then, so thanks very much for being here today. And I'd like to say that I won't be doing a fourth anniversary. I probably will be. There'll be a 4th and a 5th and a 6th anniversary. This war cannot end. If this war ends in yet another pseudo peace like Minsk 1, Minsk 2, the Nazis in the Kremlin will not give up. It'll just be a pause, then they'll have another go. That's it. Two rights. Keep democracy alive there. There's not enough left in the US for a DNA sample. Yeah, unfortunately, the United States could well end up like that. Anyway, okay, I hope there is peace in our time. But quite honest, I'd rather there was a war now, get it over with, than I'm still, whilst I'm relatively physically tough enough, and rather than having war in 20 years' time when I probably won't be. Okay, thanks. Bye for now.